Hello and welcome to Louise Singleton Creations. In today's video, I'm going to be using thin strips of cardstock to create barriers within my resin piece. I had this idea a while ago and I've been dying to try it out, so I finally did, and I was so pleased with the result because I was able to create the design that I wanted without the colours merging into other colours. It kept them completely separate and I had complete control over what my finished piece would look like. So if that idea has sparked your interest, get yourself a drink, get comfortable and enjoy the video. To create my flowers, I purchased some black matte A4 cardstock, and it's 300 GSM, which means 300 grams per square metre. First, I measured it and then cut it at 24 centimetres along the long side. Next, I scored it at 6 centimetre intervals on my scoring board. You don't need a scoring board, but it does help. After scoring it, I folded along all those score lines and gave it a good press down, and that just made sure it was nice crisp folds so that it could all be folded in on itself. And as you can see, I folded towards the centre and then folded again, but it didn't fold flat. So what I needed to do was just trim off a little bit off each end so that it would fold all in on itself really nice and neatly. After that, I just used some sticky tape to stick together the two ends in the middle, and then we were ready for the next step. So this is what we're going to be using to make all of our flower petals, and it makes it really nice and easy because all you need to do is make the one and cut it lots of times rather than making lots and lots of individual petals separately, which would take you forever. So all I'm doing here is using my lines on my ruler to guide me. I'm cutting at 4mm width all along. I'll only show you one because I don't want you to get bored. And then those are what we're going to make the flowers out of. So once you have all your V shapes that we've just made, you just need to add a little bit of PVA glue just in the centre, and you're going to be stacking 3 together, all inside of each other. After I had stacked 3 together, I just used a bulldog clip at the bottom where the glue was to hold it together while the glue dried. And you will need 3 of these for each flower. Okay, the glue's dried and it's time for probably the most important part. As you can see, all those little petals are very closed and I wanted them to be open, otherwise I wouldn't be able to pour resin into them. And so I clipped them all together. As you can see, I just stacked them next to each other and put a clip at the bottom to keep them in place. And then I used pencils, and it was a bit fiddly at first. The first ones that you put in, first 6 pencils, will be quite tricky to get in. As you can see, they just slot in, and you do that for each one, each set of 3. So it's quite, it's one of those things, it's hard to explain, you just need to watch. And yeah, those first ones were a little bit tricky. It helps if your pencils are really sharp, and mine weren't. But once you've got those in, then you repeat it so that there's 3 pencils in each petal. Now the next step is optional, but I found that it really helped. I just took some water and sprayed it all over, not too much, just enough to wet it, and I left it to dry. And I found that helped it to really keep its shape really well. I haven't actually tried it without the water, but it worked for me, so it's up to you. You can try it both ways. Okay, next you're going to need the base for your flower, and it's just one of the same pieces as before, one of those V's, and all I'm doing is pressing down in the middle and folding it in when it comes right down, and then making it into 4 small petals instead of 2 large ones. And this is what we're going to use to connect together those other ones that we made earlier. Once I'd finished folding, I added a little bit of the PVA glue just in the middle to hold it all together. And then what I didn't film myself doing was I did the same thing as before and added pencils to help it to get that nice round shape. Once the petals were dry, it was time to take out the pencils and put them all together to make our one flower. I took the small one, which you've just seen me make, and I added some glue in between each section, and all I did then was slotted the main flower parts into each section and arranged it so that it looked just right. It took me a while to get it just right, and because at first I didn't get the middle one high enough and it just didn't look right. So you need to make sure that the middle one is fairly high so you've got a natural looking curve to the flower and it doesn't look flat. Okay, I've shown you the main and most important bits, but I'm just going to really quickly show you the other components that I used to make my picture. So here I'm just making the stem, and all I'm doing is cutting 3 pieces, the same thickness as before, 4mm, and I'm just going to stick them together and that forms the stem. Okay, let me show you how I make the leaves. I just take a strip, just like before, one of the same ones as before, and I fold it about 1/3 of the way down. So then I have a short side and a long side. Then, using a pencil, I curl the top of the long side and attach it to the short side so that curl forms a kind of, what's the word? Almost like a spiral effect, just where it meets the straight part. It's another I keep saying it's hard to explain, it's easier just to watch. I ended up making lots and lots and lots of leaves as space fillers because however many I made, I still kept finding spaces where I wanted them. So yeah, make lots of those because they're really useful. To finish the leaf off, I just added some more glue just towards the crease at the bottom and stuck that part at the bottom together so it created a better, more natural looking leaf shape. Once I'd made everything, I put them all into the mould and arranged them to look just how I wanted them to look. So it took me a long time. I just sat there fiddling about with them and I glued them all together so it was all in one piece, and that way it would make the next step a lot easier. Now it's time for the resin, and it was hard to guess how much resin I would need. I think I ended up making 160 grams, and I think it was a little bit too much, and at that stage I made a coaster as well. Yeah, that's what, sorry, I'm trying to remember as I'm speaking. So yeah, I did have a little bit too much. And here I'm just using my torch on the very smallest flame so that I don't damage the mould or overheat the resin. And that just gets rid of any micro bubbles that are in there before I add my paper. And here I'm just going around the edge with a micro brush just to make sure that there's no air pockets trapped. You might see some little bare patches on the mould. That's what happens when you're just pouring enough resin just to cover the base, because that's what I wanted. I wanted it as shallow as I possibly could. But what happens is it kind of shrinks away from the silicone if it's not a real lot of resin. So you do need to go in and fill in any patches afterwards if you've missed any. The resin I've used for this is transparent resin from Resin Pro, which you will probably know by now if you've watched my other videos. That is the one that I use most of the time for anything like this. And there I go, I'm just filling in those little patches. Oh, and this mould, that's also from Resin Pro. They do some quite good moulds there, so I've got a few of them now. Right, so the whole idea of making these flowers was to make a barrier which I could fill with resin. Now, because I'm going to be doing that, I don't want there to be any gaps underneath. It needs to be completely airtight so that the resin can't flow through underneath. So here you can see I'm weighting down any bits that look like they were going to be sticking up to make sure it's all completely immersed in the resin. However, and this is really, really important, I was so lucky. As you can see, I've put those bottles on, and I went back after about an hour or two, I think like 2 hours, and the resin had seeped up onto the bottom of the bottles. If I'd have left that until it was fully cured, I would have been in trouble because I wouldn't have got the bottles off. So if you're going to weigh it down with anything, either use some silicone sheet underneath your weights, your bottles, whatever you're using to weigh it down, or make sure you get back to it really after about an hour and remove them and just wipe the bottoms down. Yeah, that's quite important. Okay, this is where the real fun begins. I'm using purple mica powder and purple interference mica powder from Resin Pro. I'm also using a large syringe and a small syringe to apply my resin. Now, it's not essential. You can do it without it. I found that it was a bit tricky to get the hang of at first using the syringe to apply the resin into the small places, but yeah, I got used to it and I would use it again, to be honest. And even if you're not going to use them to apply the resin, they're really handy if you accidentally pour too much on, just to take it off again by sucking it out with the syringe. It works really well. So yeah, they're just a bit hard to get used to, that's all. I'm using the same resin as I used for that first shallow layer, which is the transparent resin from Resin Pro. And yeah, as you can see, it's self-explanatory really. I just added a little bit of the purple, and you can see how clumsy I was there, can't you? I was clumsy on my first few goes with the syringe, but I really got the hang of it in the end. So yeah, I added a bit of the purple in the centre of the flower, and then the interference purple at the ends, and it merged really beautifully, and I love the way the flowers turned out. I'm going to do the leaves in just the same way, and this time I'm using green and yellow, and they're the Sahara pigments again from Resin Pro. I thought for a long time before deciding on the colours for my background. I even asked my patrons for help because I just couldn't decide what to do. But in the end, I went for some neutral colours, like creamy colours in opaque pigments. I wanted the opaque pigments because that way I thought if, you know, the flowers were nice and shiny and the background wasn't, the flowers would remain the main feature of the picture, and so that's why I went for the opaque pigments, which I will link to in the description. And yes, you've guessed it, they're also from Resin Pro. This time I just poured the resin on and I didn't worry too much about using the syringes because it was a bigger space. However, the syringes did still come in handy when I poured on too much by mistake. At this stage I felt that it was just lacking a little bit of something, and so I just added some gold to the colour that I'd already mixed because I didn't have any clear resin left mixed, and so I just added it around the edge just to darken the edges a bit and add a little bit of shine. I mixed it in to the existing background really well because I didn't want the gold to stand out too much. The next day, once it was cured, I added my final layer of clear resin, the same resin as before. Whatever you're going to be using your tray for will kind of govern which resin you use. If you're going to be putting food onto this, you can use epoxy food from Resin Pro. Or if you're going to be using it to put hot things onto, you can use Top Pro resin from Resin Pro also. But I've just gone for the one I've been using all along, which is the transparent resin. So many resins to choose from. And here's the coaster that I've been making at the same time with my leftover bits that I've had. And I really love the way the coaster turned out. Really, I should have mixed up some Top Pro heat resistant resin for this, but I had resin left over and I ended up just using that. Okay, let's get these beauties out of the moulds. It's always the best bit, always. I was dying to see what they look like underneath as well. So let's have a look. And there we go. It actually looks really good on the underside too. In fact, the black is more pronounced underneath than it is on top. It looks thicker. And so what I'm going to do is colour the edges of these in a moment. But I just wanted to mention that this technique that I've done today, I really enjoyed it. And do you know why I enjoyed it so much? It's because I had control. The thing with resin is you don't have very much control over your finished piece because it does its own thing. But by making these barriers, it gives you control over what your finished picture will be. And every now and again, it's nice to have a little bit of control. Anyway, so here I'm using a black Posca marker just to colour the edges. I wanted to keep them black in keeping with the black outline of the flowers, and it did take a few coats. With it being black, you notice any bits that are missing, and then I varnished over the top as well. So here are the close-ups of the finished pieces, and yeah, I love them. What do you think? I hope you're going to have a go at this because it really is really good fun. So I've come to the end of the video. I really can't believe I've got all that work into 19 minutes of video. My goodness, it took a lot longer than 19 minutes. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed it. Give it a thumbs up, please, if you did. And don't forget, if you haven't subscribed already and you'd like to do so, please hit that subscribe button and I will see you again next time. Bye for now.